Good morning. Well, morning. If anybody doesn't know me, I'm Judy Oder, and I am the Mission and Social Concerns Commission liaison to the Reverends Elmarie and Scott Parker, our mission co-workers who are based in Lebanon. I met the Reverends Parker several years ago at a Synod of the Covenant Assembly, where they talked about their work. I was so very impressed with what they were doing and what they were and are doing that I have been receiving their newsletters ever since and following what they're doing. I'm also very grateful that we can hear about that ongoing ministry this morning. And a very special thank you to Elmarie, who has just graduated from her doctoral program and is taking some vacation time in Oregon. So she had to get up really early this morning to join you at 6 o'clock there. So, Elmarie, I will turn it over to you.
Well, thank you, Judy, and good morning to all of you. And I'm very grateful to Judy and to Beth for the invitation to join you all. Greetings as well from Scott, my husband, and I'm looking forward to sharing with you a little bit of how we have seen God at work in the part of the world where we've been privileged to serve for nearly 10 years. It'll be 10 years at the end of June. Hard to believe the time has just flown by. So a little bit of background, and then I'm going to pull up a PowerPoint to share some of the story of what's going on in Lebanon. So Scott and I both serve as mission co-workers through the Presbyterian Church USA. We're commissioned by our General Assembly for this work, and very grateful to be your all's face to our partners in Iraq, Syria, and Lebanon. So those have been the three countries that we have primarily had the opportunity and privilege of getting to know, along with our partners who serve and have served faithfully in those countries since the early 1800s. So the very first Protestant church in all of the Middle East was established in the year 1835 in the city of Mosul, Iraq, and that was followed shortly after by the establishment of the Protestant church in Beirut, Lebanon. These are all Reformed heritage churches that are forebears as Presbyterian missioners, and in Iraq, missioners also from the Reformed Church of America and the United Church of Christ were a part of starting as they got to know local people on the ground. So these are longtime serving communities that have been led by Indigenous pastors and elders for many, many, many years. And then more recently, we've been getting to know the work of partners in the Gulf states of Kuwait, Bahrain, and Oman. And I actually, right before coming to the US for my graduation, had the opportunity to travel to those three countries and see that work in person, which was really amazing. One of my key learnings from having lived in this part of the world for a while now is just having a better sense of the unique texture and history and context of each country and the peoples who call those countries home. And so there's a tremendous amount of diversity across the Middle East. It is not all one thing. So you'll catch a little bit of that flavor today. I'm going to focus on Lebanon this morning because so much has happened since 2019 in Lebanon that has really transformed the country from what we knew from 2013 to 2019 and what's going on now. So that's a little bit by way of introduction of our countries where we have served. Scott and I are both pastors Through the Presbyterian Church USA, we served local congregations in the US, in California, Florida, and Ohio before taking this call. And Scott has been serving with one of our partners, the Middle East Council of Churches, and has been working with them to develop a play-based trauma intervention program for Syrian and Iraqi children who are refugeed in Lebanon. And then I have been serving in a role called regional liaison. So I serve as a relational bridge between all of the different partners that the Presbyterian Church USA has relationship with in the countries that I've named, and our national offices, and all of you. So that role involves lots of conversations and learning, and just spending time mostly with the leadership of these different partner organizations and church entities, and being able to pray and support those leaders in their work, and especially at a time like this, which is very challenging. So let me bring up my PowerPoint and we'll go from there. I've called this Treasure in the Ordinary because so much has turned upside down in the country of Lebanon, and yet we have had this opportunity to see God's treasure at work. I was thinking of Paul's comments to the church in Corinth that we find in his second letter, chapter 4, 7 through 9, where he talks about how we hold this treasure of a God in Jesus Christ in us as clay jars. And yet God sees fit to work in and through us. A local artist by the name of Stephanie Sade, she picks up this theme in this piece of art that you see on the screen, and she calls it second nature. And what she says about this a piece of broken glass is that it looks like something that you could just throw away, but she painted the broken edges with gold to talk about and represent that it is really as we are broken open in our lives, in our communities, in our societies, that we really begin to see the true treasure of who we can be together. And I found that to be a powerful representation of those words from Paul as well. So a little bit of what's happened in Lebanon. As I mentioned earlier, the country has really transformed in the last few years. All of this was set in motion starting in the spring of 2019, when the Lebanese government failed to pay the interest on its debt and pay the percent of its debt that was due in that particular year. It ends up that that kind of decision is catastrophic for a country. The entire economy collapsed by the fall of 2019. What that meant for the people of Lebanon is that the banks shut down, and people no longer had access to funds that they had been saving and putting away for a whole variety of things, anything from college educations to retirement to emergency medical care that went beyond what their insurance would cover, to business expenses for the different types of businesses that are operated. That has been heartbreaking and is still not set right to this day. And so we began to see during those months of starting in October of 2019, a lot of public art, like what you see in this picture. And it represents really the cry of the people, because they went from a middle income country where we saw very few people on the streets, to being at the bottom of the economic pile, just above Afghanistan in terms of economic capacity for the people. And so this gentleman that you see here in the picture is a Lebanese father. Um, he lost his job in that economic meltdown. And one of the things that really stands out to us from our conversation with him is his sense of dignity and deep commitment to continuing to try to find a way to provide for his family. And so here he's sitting with a shoe shining kit. This is work that before this, we used to really see young Syrian boys doing in order to bring in some extra income for their families as they were seeking refuge in Lebanon. And now here's a father doing the same thing to bring in some lira in order to provide for his family. This is another piece of street art that just shows up all over the place. And we know this as one of the petitions of the Lord's Prayer, and yet it has become the cry of the people day in and day out anymore in Lebanon. So just to give a little bit of a tangible of what this has meant in terms of the economy bottoming out. A typical middle income for a person would be between 1.5 million and 2.5 million lira a month. At the exchange rate that had been in place for several decades, that would have come out to a minimum of $1,000 a month. Today, the lira is now worth nearly 100,000 lira. So before it was worth 1,500. Today it's worth nearly 100,000. That's how much it has devalued. And so that same income is worth around $30 today. And yet the prices, everything has inflated on average around 200%. That's the inflation rate that people are living with in Lebanon. So we've had a sense of the cost of inflation and the impact that means for us as families in the United States over the last few years. You can imagine then the pain of having an inflation rate of around 200% when we've been living with one that has been at its height between 8 and 9%. One of the impacts of that is that to fill a car with fuel right now costs nearly 1.6 million lira. So that would be an entire month's salary or more just for 20 liters of fuel. 20 liters of fuel is enough to get back and forth from work about half of the week. So one of the things that's happened in Lebanon is that people literally cannot afford to drive to work anymore. One of the biggest arguments going on within the society today is public sector workers going on strike in order to argue for an increase in their salaries. The lowest wage in Lebanon in terms of minimum wage would be around 600,000 lira a month. So when when $1 is now worth 100,000 lira, $6 is not a whole lot to live on in a month when you're trying to provide for anything. So that's the situation that has been facing people in Lebanon since 2019. When that economic collapse happened, it fomented what was called a thawra. Thawra means revolution in Arabic, and you see it written in Arabic there on the fist, thawra. This was really a unique event in Lebanon where all parts of Lebanese society were gathered together in order to really speak and protest to their government to address these issues and find a solution for the fact that they had failed to pay on the interest and on the country's debt. The government has yet to do that. And so people are pretty exhausted at this point. A lot of the energy for the thawra fell away when the pandemic started in late February and early March of 2020. So here's Lebanon dealing with an economic collapse. The banks are closed, and now the pandemic is unfolding. That happens in the midst of also the collapse of their government. So their prime minister resigned at the end of October of 2019. There was a new prime minister elected in December, formed a cabinet by January of 2020, intent to solve these economic problems, and then the pandemic hit. And so they had to turn their energies to helping the country navigate that. And then, of course, in August of 2020 was the Beirut port explosion. You may remember seeing the images of that devastation that left over 300,000 people without housing. So it was quite a collection of tsunami events that hit Lebanon in a very short amount of time. In the midst of all of that, you could continue to see the sense of the Lebanese people's spirit. So this is another piece of public art that emerged during that time, made from recyclable materials, but holding up the Lebanese flag and really seeking in that kind of visible form to bring people together from across all different religious and ethnic and political lines in Lebanon, which is what happened during that period of revolution from October through January. This is a picture of the Beirut port after the blast, so you can see the devastation to the grain silos. These are the grain silos for the country. So the country lost all of its wheat, and we're just figuring out how to regain enough wheat for the country when the war in Ukraine started. And Lebanon imports most of its grain from Ukraine. So that was yet another layer of agony for the people in Lebanon, because that access to grain was cut off. In the foreground, you see another piece of public art. This is made from the twisted remains of the warehouses at the port. And it's this human figure holding a dove. So again, you get this sense of the tension between the utter despair of the people of Lebanon over what has happened to their country, and yet this ongoing resilience and sense of hope in the image of the dove. Here you see in another piece of public art their cry for justice, justice from their governing officials, and they are yet awaiting that. And then this is a piece of art that I found also so meaningful. It's a Christmas ornament, but made from the shattered glass that was meters thick across the one section of Beirut that was especially devastated by the port blast. And so artisans collected that glass and melted it down and made all kinds of beautiful pieces from it. So again, you have that gift of new life, of a sense of hope coming out of immense tragedy. And then this is a mural that sits downtown Beirut. It takes up nearly a city block. And in it captures so many of the different images of who makes up Lebanon and the history of Lebanon from ancient times to the modern day. And again, that message and cry for hope. That continues to be the cry of the people in Lebanon to this day. These are the partners that we have the privilege of working with, all of them with the exception of the Alamana Center down in the bottom row and the Bible Society of the Gulf. Everybody else are based in Lebanon, also with the exception of the evangelical churches in Iraq. And so these partners have been living the reality that I just shared. All of their families are trying to survive that reality, which has impacted every sector of society. It's gutted the healthcare sector. It has brought deep devastation to the educational sector, on and on and on. And yet every day our partners get up and they continue to find ways to walk alongside of those that they minister to who are even more vulnerable than themselves. And so my respect for who we have the privilege of working with is off the charts. I've learned so much from them about what it looks like to persevere with hope and joy when everything is at its worst. Our primary church partners are the National Evangelical Synod of Syria and Lebanon. This is the Presbyterian Church in both of those countries, and the Assembly of National Evangelical Churches in Iraq. That is the Presbyterian presence in Iraq. Then we work with ecumenical bodies, Middle East Council of Churches and the Fellowship of Middle East Evangelical Churches. We work with student organizations like the World Student Christian Federation. We work with educational institutions, the Near East School of Theology and Lebanese American University and Blessed School, being the three primary that we have the privilege of working with. And then a number of different nonprofits that work with particular people groups. So the Joint Christian Committee working with Palestinian refugees in Lebanon, the Compassion Protestant Society. This is the diaconal arm of the Synod of Syria and Lebanon. Genesian Memorial Program working with Armenians in both Lebanon and Syria. The Arab Institute for Women, which is the earliest women's institute in the world that was established in the early 1970s. They do some amazing work at both a scholarly level and a grassroots level. And then the Forum for Development, Culture, and Dialogue, based in Lebanon, doing a lot of peace building work with young adults, and their focus in the last number of years has been in Syria. They've been responsible for brokering a number of local peace agreements in Syria so that families are able to return to their communities. And the Contact and Resource Center working with the physically disabled community in Lebanon. The MENA Trauma Resource Center providing resources for addressing trauma throughout the Middle East and Northern Africa. So all of those are based in Lebanon. And then the Alamana Center and the Bible Society of the Gulf, we had the privilege of seeing their work in person just right at the end of April. So that was a tremendous gift. Oh, go away. I want to share just a little bit about the work that Scott has been involved with, and then we'll have a little bit of time for some back and forth. Strong Kids, Strong Emotions is the program that Scott was asked by Middle East Council of Churches to innovate along with his Lebanese counterpart. We'll meet her in a moment here. And so, as I mentioned, it's a play-based trauma intervention program that also integrates in some biology-based interventions that help kids begin to become aware of how their bodies respond to trauma, and so gives them the tools to then moderate those responses so that they are able to function in school and in the whole of their life. This is Rana, the partner that Scott has been working with. She is a child psychologist, Lebanese child psychologist. And so together they've been quite a dynamic duo with this program. Especially during this time since 2019, the children that they've been working with have been out of school. I mentioned that the educational system has been impacted by this economic meltdown and then the pandemic and on and on and on. So a number of the children that they work with are not literate, and either in Arabic or in English. And so they developed this symbolic way of talking about the resiliency skills that they are teaching. So this poster shares what those skills are, and the symbols are how they then help the children learn about, for example, grounding and what that means and looks like. An example of that really comes from the image of that tree, where if a child is feeling traumatized, they would be very conscientious about planting their feet on the ground and being aware of that contact with the ground, or pushing up against a wall and feeling the solidness of the wall. And what they've learned through neuropsychology is that when our bodies do that, when we become consciously aware of the firmness around us, it helps our anxiety levels drop so that we can access the thinking part of our brain and make conscious choices rather than just reacting to a situation. So that's one example. You can see that they use a lot of crafts, and these in particular are called the children's mini-me's. So they each make one of these at the beginning of a session of Strong Kids. And then as the children are learning about the resilient zone, they can, at the beginning of each session, come in and use their mini-me to talk about where they are starting out the day. Some of them might be above the resilient zone and kind of be in that anxious place. Some of them may come in right in that okay zone. They feel at ease, and others might be coming in at more of a depressed place. And so this is part of helping the children become aware of where they're at so that they can then make decisions about which intervention tool they want to utilize. They also do a lot with crafts and play. One of the other interesting things that has been discovered through neuropsychology is that in our brains, there's a switch that when one is engaged in creative activity, it moves the brain chemistry away from anxiety. And that, I think, is such a fascinating way of how we are designed. And so that is part of the reason that crafts and arts are such an important part in the lives of children, is to help strengthen that resiliency that comes with creative expression. One of the kids, all of these kids were Syrian children. So these are ways that you can be in touch with us. As Judy knows, I am always appreciative of emails. Scott is as well. We're happy to address any kinds of questions that you have over time. People checking in with us is always appreciated as well. We also have the privilege of working with two different networks of Presbyterians in the U.S. Who feel pulled to a particular part of the Middle East. So the Iraq Partnership Network, of course, works with our partners in Iraq, and the Syria-Lebanon Partnership Network works with our partners in both of those countries. And so the networks are an important partner with me in educational work in the U.S. to just help congregations and presbyteries have a more nuanced understanding of what's happening in each of these countries, and to build relationship with our partners. And the other piece is working advocacy issues. We in the U.S. are privileged that we can sit down with our elected officials and talk about the issues that we're concerned about. And as Presbyterians, we discern together through our General Assembly a number of different issues, and that is what guides us as staff when we sit down with our elected officials. Tangible example of that is how we understand the impact of sanctions in countries on the everyday people, and urging our elected officials to use other means of diplomacy, because sanctions end up being economic warfare on the everyday people of the country. They have very little impact on the actual ruling class. So that's just a tangible example. So I'm going to pause there and look forward to hearing any of your thoughts or comments or questions. If you want to take a picture of this, or I can send it separately, if you're wanting to be a financial partner in any of the work that I've talked about, this is how you can go about that. So I'm going to stop sharing screen now.
Okay, does anyone have any questions? Yes.
Yes, thanks for the overview. It's been very interesting. But I when you talked about your partnerships, do you do any partnerships with some of the traditional Christian churches in Lebanon, like the Maronites? And
Yeah.
is that kind of a separate group out there all on its own?
That's a great question. The way that we are able to partner really well with the Catholic parts of the community. So Maronites is one of a number of different Catholic entities in Lebanon, as well as the Orthodox, both the Greek Orthodox and a variety of Oriental Orthodox churches. Is through the Middle East Council of Churches. So what makes them unique as an ecumenical body is that they represent all four Christian families in the Middle East, and these are the same Christian families that you would find anywhere in the world. So the Protestant family, the Catholic family, the Orthodox family, and the Oriental Orthodox family. So we do, as PCUSA, we do a lot of work with Middle East Council of Churches. It's through them that Strong Kids, Strong Emotions happens. So we are a partner with them in that work. Also in a lot of humanitarian work, most recently with the earthquake that impacted northern Syria and southern Turkey. So Middle East Council of Churches was immediately on the ground. They've been working long-term in Syria already. And so they have the networks in place to respond to that in an immediate way.
I'm interested to understand more what the form partnership means, because I looked at that chart and you're one person and you can't be all of those places. So does partnership mean that we're providing funding or grants, or are we providing people and other resources? And maybe that varies in different places, but I just wanted to understand more how you were using the word partnership.
Yeah, that is a great question. So there's several layers to it. All of those organizations that you saw have a formal relationship with our national offices. So that's one layer of partnership. That means that we invite one another to each other's gatherings, like our General Assembly. Those would be among the partners that we look to invite as an ecumenical advisory delegate to our General Assembly. We are then also invited to their either partner meetings or General Assemblies, whatever terminology they happen to use. So, for example, when I return to Lebanon, a week from today, I'll be back in Lebanon. And at the synods of Syria and Lebanon, their partnership gathering. PCUSA, I'll be representing PCUSA along with my colleague Luciano. They held their General Assembly last November, and I participated as a representative of the PCUSA. So there's that kind of partnership. There is certainly the ways that we collaborate financially on different projects that each of those partners have identified as their priorities. And so that's a part of my work, is sitting with partners. And I meet with all of those partners and talk with them about the work that they're doing, what their priorities are. We're looking for that match. You notice that Matthew 25 symbol on the PowerPoint. So we're looking for ways that we can collaborate with them on addressing the root causes of poverty, addressing ways that cause divisions within societies, and helping to bridge those. So a lot of the peace building work, congregational vitality, those kinds of things. And then really through the networks, we get at more of that personal, holistic relationship. And a lot of that happens congregation to congregation, and the networks help facilitate that. And so in that way, congregations are able to get to know one another and each other's work. They're able to be prayer partners together for each other's work. We invite people to come and visit. It's a little bit harder for our partners to come to the US and visit, not because they don't want to, but because visas are very difficult to get, given current dynamics of our politics in the US. So even getting religious visitors visa is hard to get for anyone coming from Syria, Iraq, or Lebanon, if they're coming on those passports. Some of our partners have Canadian passports or EU passports or Australian passports, and that all works fine. So those are some of the different layers that are part of that partnership language. So it's a great question you've asked, because it is multidimensional for sure.
Thank you, that's helpful.
Yes.
I had a question about, not sure exactly how to word it, but like obviously your work and your husband's work comes from like a Christian perspective, that's your grounding, but like is there a line between like, are you trying to convert people, or do you just do the work and they know that it's from a Christian organization? And like, so I'm assuming a lot of the kids that come from Syria would be Muslim. And so, where's the line between like proselytizing and like just doing the work and them knowing that it comes from a Christian perspective? I'm not sure.
Yeah, that's a great question. Lebanon is an interesting place these days. We have lots of people coming from the US in particular who do come with very much a conversion aim. That is not the posture that Peace USA takes. So we are working alongside of our partners to support them in their work. So for example, with the program that Scott is a part of, the Middle East Council of Churches, the way that they work, they do a lot of interfaith work at multiple levels, from kind of high level leaders from different parts of the Muslim community, different parts of the Christian community meeting together to know each other, to work collaboratively on issues of common concern, all of those kinds of things. So their posture is one of mutuality and mutual respect, working together in the community. So the kids are not coming into an environment where they are being preached to. They are being loved with the love of God through Jesus Christ, because that's who we are as followers of Jesus. And in that way, they get to know who we are as Christian people. I've learned the most from our partners in Iraq in terms of how they show up in the community. And it is remarkable to me to sit with Muslim people who come regularly to worship services of the Presbyterian churches in Iraq. And they come because there they experience love. And that is something incredibly winsome to them in a country that has been torn apart by a whole lot of ugliness. And so in that way, I've heard the testimonies from different Muslim people all across the spectrum. From when I spend time with Christians, they help me to be a better Muslim. So from that end, to people coming to faith in Jesus Christ. So what I respect about how our partners in Iraq work is that they understand that what God has asked of them is to love people and to be the ones to initiate stepping across any of the divides in society, to step towards the other, especially those that would name Christians as an enemy. So to reach out with the same kind of love that God in Jesus Christ reached out to humanity when we as human beings were yet enemies of God. That's their job. That's how they understand their call. And it's up to the Holy Spirit to do anything else. And the Holy Spirit is at work in some really amazing ways. So that's kind of the mix of what I've seen. It's a very different approach than many of the organizations that are coming from the US take. I find a lot of life in what I've seen from our partners on the ground.
I'm sorry to get away from missions, but you spent the first 20 minutes talking about the dire economic situation, and in the last couple of days, it's been reported by Reuters that there are 2 Lebanese men, brothers, that are being prosecuted in Europe and in France. One of them is on the board of governors of the Lebanese bank for stealing 500 million US dollars.
Yep.
And so I guess my question is, if you're in a position stealing this money from the Lebanese central bank, what's the position of the government with respect to prosecuting these criminals?
Yes, that is the question of the day. These are court cases that have been ongoing for a number of months now. Thankfully, the Europeans got the ball rolling And then the Lebanese courts are also questioning these two brothers. One is the governor of the central bank and has been for decades. And, of course, they profess their innocence in all of this, but it has been a multi-decade process of stealing from the Lebanese people. We'll see what the outcomes are. We're praying for accountability. We'll see whether it's possible to recover any of that money and actually return it to the Lebanese people. That's an open question at this point in time. And the government, they are stymied. The president's term came to an end at the end of October. There was no president elected, so it's a parliamentary system. So it's Parliament that's responsible for electing the president. And Parliament has been in a caretaker government mode. So they don't have the authority constitutionally to make decisions at this point in time. So it's an utter mess right now and has been for months. This is part of the cynicism of the Lebanese people. There's very little sense of hope that they have in their elected officials. So the caretaker government continues to meet on a periodic basis in order to make that election of a president. And then it would reopen the process of reappointing another prime minister. So the current prime minister is a caretaker prime minister. So it's a very different process than what we have in the US. And it's taken me a while to get my mind wrapped around it. But pray. We just have to keep praying that these elected officials would be convicted by the Spirit of God to actually serve their constituencies and not themselves.
Thank you.
I had a follow-up question to the earlier. So with, you doing mission work and especially with other groups coming in with a traditional conversion bent, do you ever get threats from like political actors or, anyone who just doesn't want Christians, working, showing love or trying to convert people in Lebanon or Iraq or Syria?
Yeah, that's a great follow-up question. I have not, neither has Scott. We've only ever been received with hospitality in Iraq, Syria, and Lebanon. The Lebanese government, such as it is, will take away the visas of foreigners who are causing disruptions. So those that work in a very, extroverted way are not going to be in the country very long. And that is true also for Iraq and Syria. So for anyone who's coming into these countries, they have to be willing to actually learn something of the local culture and be able to engage within the cultural context and not expect it to be a Western country. They're not Western countries. So that's what I've observed is people get disinvited. Their visas are taken away and they're sent on the next plane back home.
Are there any other questions? I just have one. We do not hear a whole lot in our news about Lebanon or Syria, unless it's like an earthquake or in Turkey or whatever. How do you feel about the way your area of the world is being treated in our media?
Yeah, thank you, Judy. I think what I've observed over time, and I don't know that there's any fault in this. It's just limited bandwidth. Um, our our media overall tends to focus on a very narrow slice of the reality anywhere in the Middle East, and anywhere else globally for that matter. But then they repeat that story again and again and again and again, so that it creates this sense that that's the only thing happening in a particular country. Name your country around the world. So I think what I've taken from that is just the realization that if God's Spirit has put a particular part of the world on your heart, then it's up to us to do the work of reading more widely, of looking at a whole variety of sources, of making relational connections, in order to gain a more nuanced understanding. And that it takes effort, and I don't think there's any way around that. So I think the bottom line is paying attention to what Christ's Spirit is pulling us towards, a particular place, a particular people, and then getting engaged, and going from there. So,
Thank you. Is there anything else? Thank you so much, Emily. Thank you very much. Thank you for getting up so early for us.
oh, you're very welcome. You're very welcome. It's been a great gift to be with you all, and I'm at your service. So let me know as there's follow-up questions or curiosities that you have. I'm happy to stay in conversation with you all.
Do you share your whole slide presentation? Would you share that with Judy, the whole slide presentation?
Yeah, I have it uploaded to OneDrive, so I'll send you the link for it. The pictures make it too big to just send as an attachment.
Thank you. Okay, thank you so very, very much.
Okay, take good care.